Designated implies that it has an assigned purpose. So it's been given a purpose, and that is to facilitate the work of the United Nations, to make the work of the United Nations easier. So the library is supposed to help the United Nations, designated to facilitate the work of the United Nations.
Yeah.
So the library, because the library is the subject, then when we get to the next clause, and the library does something, the library focuses on the needs of the UN Secretariat and diplomatic missions. So that implies that it collects material, that the people who work there collect material that is useful to the UN.
Hmm.
And they probably organize it and allow it to be searched in certain ways. They help searching. Okay, so the library is the subject of both clauses. This library is designated in this way, and it focuses on these things. So it's been told that it needs to do this, and its purpose is to focus attention in this way.
I will show you.
So the Secretariat is
Yeah.
actually it's actually part of the bureaucracy. It's part of the organization. So a secretariat. So that question is not a good question because he's not.
Oh, it's wrong. Okay.
Yeah, a secretariat is not an individual,
Yeah.
but the current UN General Secretary
Mhm.
has an office and people work in that office as part of the secretariat. That is the department, the main central department of the UN.
So,
The secretariat might be located in that building. That is, they might have their offices or their main office there. And probably the Secretary General, who is in charge of the Secretariat, probably he has an office there as well. Although he would have other roles where he has to go to other places.
I got it. Perfect.
Yeah. So a secretariat is actually a department in a bureaucracy or in an organization, and it's called that because it's underneath a secretary. That's the name of the leader. Now, diplomatic missions are like embassies.
So,
Um,
because you know,
so diplomatic missions are the offices in different countries that represent the UN. So the UN has, similar to embassies and consulates, it has its own representatives in all of the countries that are members. So like in Australia, there's a Russian embassy, there's an American
yeah.
embassy, there's probably a consulate of some kind in Sydney, for each of those. There's also a UN
Oh,
diplomatic
embassy.
mission.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be called an embassy, or it might just be called the UN representatives in Australia or something like that. Um, yeah, so that's what they mean by diplomatic missions. So we're talking here about the main part of the UN, that does its work, not that makes its basic decisions. So the decisions are made by the assembly. The member states come together and make decisions, but then the work that then has to be done is done through a bureaucracy and through UN diplomatic missions. To have a grounds pass, I think in this case, grounds modifies pass. So what they're talking about is permission to be on site, a pass. So it's like having a student ID when you go to access the library at Sydney. If you're allowed to access the UN headquarters, which not everybody is, you're also allowed to access the library.
I got it. It's
Yeah.
like a card.
Yeah, it's probably an identification card. Yeah. So, organizations accredit, that is, they allow some media journalists or representatives, they allow them access. So the UN has a certain number of journalists from probably from mostly legitimate sources. So yeah, the BBC would have journalists who are allowed to visit the UN headquarters. But probably a bunch of other ones as well are seen as legitimate. They get passes, and what you have to do to get media accreditation, you have to put in an application and say, I'm a journalist, I write for this publication, I need a media pass for the UN headquarters. So it's a difference of context. The UN wouldn't be a place where you were thinking about physical safety in the sense that you might if you were in a factory. So the priority would be given to security as a principle, which includes physical safety if there are terrorists or whatever. But security is a kind of broader concept, and it would also be about things like classified information,
Breaching the ICT stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, I got it.
yeah.
Perfect. Amazing.